One thing that I'll never understand about Wall Street executives and startup founders is that so many of them worry about money, even though they have a lot of it. They have the numbers on the spreadsheet, they have the wealth managers telling them it's going to be okay, yet still they are racked with money anxiety. In fact, when they make bad decisions, it's usually because their emotions got the best of them. In this episode of the Examine Life podcast, I talked to Joe Hudson, a coach, teacher, and facilitator at the Art of Accomplishment. In a former life, Joe was a philanthropist and a venture capitalist. We discuss how money acts as a surrogate for parental love, how emotions play a key role in decision making, and how business can be a vehicle for self-discovery. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Examined Life podcast, a podcast where we take some of life's thorniest questions and deconstruct them in a pragmatic and philosophical way so that you can lead a more productive, examined, and joyful life. Today's question is about money, that cheddar, that sweet nectar of the bank accounts. And the question we're going to look at is what makes money so emotional? And I'm joined by a friend, a mentor, an incredible human being, Mr. Joe Hudson. How's it going, Joe?
It's good. It's good to see you, man. Nice to be with you.
Yes. And I was telling Joe before we started recording that I had this dystopian kind of work dream where I was rushing around to impress Joe on this weird interview thing, kind of interviewing in the Matrix. And it really just is because I feel very invested in this conversation, and I feel very honored to be spending this time with Joe and for all our listeners. So again, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, a pleasure to be here. The honor is very mutual. Yeah.
So before we jump in, you and I met at a retreat about over the summer. But for those, and you have a nonlinear career path, so to speak. And so for our listeners who aren't familiar with your background, if you were to give the cliff notes in seasons or chapters, what would that table of contents look like?
Oof. Yeah, the first season was getting kicked out of my college and then graduating valedictorian of my second college. That'd be my first season. Second season was international stock lending, getting multiple promotions in 18 months, being 24 years old, making more money than I knew how to use at the time. And then pursuing art and music and film. And in that process, really getting into self-discovery. And I would say it's always been there a little bit in the background. Like I was always fascinated with like the parables of Jesus when I was like born and raised Catholic. And then by the time I was in college, I was interested in all parables across all religions. But it got real where it started to get embodied, where I was really doing the work, not on a theoretical basis, but in my system. Probably at around the age of 25, I did a meditation retreat and had a experience of oneness that was like a little, like God's little heroin dose, like got me hooked. I was like, whatever that is, I'm after that, and dedicated my life to that.
Wow.
And pursued art, worried about money. At that time, became very worried about whether I'd have enough, went into debt for an extended period of time so that I could be meditating 7-8 hours a day. And then, and going out and like 1 week, every couple of weeks, making a ton of money as far as hourly, because I had all these investment banking experiences. And then that moved into having kids, doing venture capital work, did that for 15 years, that in philanthropy. So that would be the next thing, where what I realized in that moment was that I needed to make business a form of self-discovery or I'd never do well at it. Meaning that I couldn't do business for the sake of business because it wasn't my joy. It wasn't in my heart. So I knew that it wouldn't be sustainable. And then through that process, found out that I wasn't a great investor. I wasn't horrible, but I wasn't great. And that I had invested in people that weren't quite there. They didn't have the mentality of a great entrepreneur. So all those things that I had learned through coaching, through my own self-discovery process, I started helping other folks learn. And then all of a sudden there was this demand for me to be a coach. There was more and more people wanting to pay me more and more money to do coaching. And so that left me with doing in-person courses for those people because I couldn't see all of them. So I'd just find out a way to meet with them quarterly in small groups of 12 or 14. The next thing I knew, I was like, oh, this is a far better way to make a living for me than venture as far as like being in deep alignment. And so I took the risk, took a pay cut, started to do it. And today run a business with multiple lines of revenue, and we make tons of money, and it's really good. And my experience is that there's really nothing I do that's not aligned with who I am. And so the only problem with that is sometimes I work a little bit more than my body or emotions want, because I just love the work so much, but still a lot of balance. My family always is first.
Wow.
Yeah.
Beautiful story, touching on so many different parts of being human, of humanness, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I hear the spiritual side, the self-discovery side, the serving others, coaching side, the craftsmanship side of, making money and investing, the money side, family. It's I love how you say you like, I'll only do things that are in alignment. I think I'm paraphrasing that. And it's funny, we teach this productivity course, but it's really kind of a coaching course that's masquerading as a productivity course.
Right.
And I'll often say, it's like the easiest way to be the most productive version of yourself is to live in alignment.
Yeah.
Because then everything just snaps into place, right? Versus like, oh, I'm going to force myself to do push-ups, before I eat a cookie, It's like,
right.
That's misalignment. So what did you get kicked out of college for the first time?
355M of the California Penal Code. The California Penal Code. It's annoying phone conversation is what I officially got kicked out of college for. What actually happened there was I had an authority issue, which will come back to the question that we're talking about generally here, which is what makes money so emotional. But this will tie into that. But I had an authority issue. I had a father who was the authority I was born into, who was not the kind of authority that one could trust. And so I didn't trust authority at all. And in college, there's a lot of authorities to rebel against, and I did. And and it was during like a very PC time of in colleges. I suspect it maybe even more now, and so there was just lots of ways in which I would do things that did not respect, what the authority in the college dorms wanted. And so when they found this excuse of 355M or the California Penal Code, they used it and kicked me out.
Oh, wow.
So I had like a 3.95 grade point average and got kicked out simultaneously. And so it was things like I'd walk into the dorm and people would have all these signs for like religious groups or all these signs for things, and I would just take them down. I would just be like, this is where I live. You don't get to just put advertisement where I live, and if you can put it up, I can put it down. Or they'd be like, one time I got busted for drinking in the halls, and they would say things like, okay, so how are we going to stop drinking in the halls? And I'd say, oh, I'm going to keep drinking in the halls. You're going to keep writing me up. It only happened once, but you're going to keep writing me up because I pay rent. So if I'm paying rent, I can do what I want here. Like, I'm not hurting anybody. So you got like, that was my attitude. I was an ass basically. And I wasn't respecting others. And so when they had this opportunity, I had this very, conservative Christian who ended up to be my roommate. And at some point, he kept on locking me out of the room. And so at some point I basically said, this doesn't feel right. It's making me want to be violent. Can we talk this out? And the threat of wanting to be violent, he had me citizens arrested for 355M of the California Penal Code. They dropped charges after I spent a night in jail. And And then I went through
Wow.
this like incredibly long trial process, and I was still having this authority issue. So the ombudsman at the time was like, just don't fight it. Say you're sorry, you'll be fine. And I had like the longest trial in the school's history. I had like RAs from both sides come to defend me and go against me and blah, blah, blah. It was like, I just was living the fight. I was just projecting the fight that I had with my family onto the world. And that's how it happened.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And so you said,
So
yeah.
I'm so grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot to unpack there. But I think I'm curious because you've had 2 stints in a world that is very familiar with our audience, which is, I guess, you said international stock lending,
Yeah.
capital markets, presumably, or not presumably, and then VC investing, and I guess after that you would, being an online or having an online component to your business, and like you said, printing money. So you figured out some version of the game of business.
Yeah.
But I'd love to talk about, you've kind of popped into these worlds of, let's use high finance. You've popped into the worlds of high finance, and then I think you went from stock lending to being an artist, if I was following the story correctly.
Correct.
And then venture capital into the coaching and the business. So I'd love to kind of maybe hear the juxtaposition of, it sounded like you were doing extremely well in stock lending to becoming an artist. Walk us through.
I love this story. This is it. So I'm doing international stock lending. I'm working for BCG at the time. This is also like the rebellion issue, the authority issue hadn't fully, cooked itself out of me at this point. So I make a splash there, but at some point I really don't like this thing that's happening, which is what I see is everybody's working their butt off. Everybody wants to be someplace that they're not. Like no one's like, I am in the job that I want to be in, except for like maybe the CEO and some managing directors. Like no one's there, right? No one's doing that. I'm watching all this politics play out. I'm watching people looking for permission instead of just doing their thing. And I'm just like, screw that, and screw all this hypocrisy. Like at the time I didn't realize that like finding hypocrisy in people, A, is easy and B, doesn't make you right. I thought it was hard and it made me right. So I left that world and pursued art. And 7 years later, I am being an assistant director on a television show, like a famous one-camera comedy. So where did I say assistant director? It was like I forgot. Like it's like where you observe the director, you sit and observe the director so that you will direct in the future, right? And so like that role and observing director or something. So I was that person and I was doing that work and I was sitting there for 2 weeks as this show got shot and I was like, holy shit, this is international stock lending. It's the same thing. There's one person who's in charge. Everybody wants to be different. Everybody's working these long hours. Everybody is like unsatisfied in their particular situation. They want to be somewhere else. There's politics playing. There's people like the star of the shows. Like every time I come to work, it's like having a little piece of me and my soul taken away. I was like, I ran for 7 years away from something into something else to find out the thing I was running towards is exactly what I was running away from. And at that moment, like a switch flipped in me and I saw, I'm going to say yes to the stuff that feels good right now. And I'm just going to say yes to anything that feels good right now, that feels like in alignment, that follows me right now. And I just started saying yes to everything that I could say yes to. And next thing I knew, I was just busier and busier and busier. And my life became more and more in alignment. So I just showed up for things. So that was the transition.
What age range were you in your mid to late 20s, if I'm doing the math on the fly?
Yeah, so probably left international stock lending around 27. I'm very bad with dates. And 35. By the time I was 35, I was in venture.
Got it. And when you said in stock lending, you kept seeing people asking for permission. I'm noticing there's people asking for permission. There's kind of these conflicts with authority.
Yeah.
There's a just pervasive sense of dissatisfaction amongst like your peer group. Am I picking out of that? What
At
are they
least that's
asking?
what I saw. Yeah.
That's what you saw. And hypocrisy.
Yeah.
What I would love to hear more on what were they asking for permission to do, or where was that permission, and what was
Yeah.
the hypocrisy?
Yeah. So the permission is kind of like, will I get in trouble with my boss? Can I get away with this? It was that that's what I mean by asking for permission, where people didn't feel empowered. People weren't like, oh, I feel empowered to make my world the way I want to make it. They were like, I have a boss rather than I have a business with a revenue problem. I only have one source of revenue instead of multiple. Like they weren't in their empowerment. That was the thing that I saw a ton of. And they were like, looking to please people outside of themselves to get ahead, instead of looking internally about how do I please myself to get ahead? How do I feel in alignment or feel good about what I'm doing as a way to get ahead? Which I think, by the way, is a far more effective way to get ahead. So that's what I mean by permission. As far as hypocrisy goes, I'm pretty sure I was just seeing my own projection of hypocrisy. But what I was seeing at the time was people saying that they wanted good ideas and they wanted ways to grow the business. But what I saw was everybody was just self-interested. And little did I know at the time that being self-interested is something that is very human and quite lovely if it's seen and felt correctly. And it's what allows us to connect as a company, right? Like today when I hire people, I ask them, what is it that you really want to do? And if their answer is not the job, I don't hire them. Like, no, like this is the important thing, is what you want to do. And if this job doesn't propel you in that, this is not the place for you. So I just didn't see any of that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we think of our question, what makes money so emotional? I think we have a few entryways into that question, because I know that a lot of our listeners, actually, before we jump into that, if our listeners want to jump into one of our coaching programs, check out radreads.co/coaching. So what makes money so emotional? So I'm going to talk a bit about my own experience, because we actually have, as you're talking, I'm seeing many similarities and many differences as well. But this whole concept that you're not putting your self-interest, or people aren't looking after themselves. Like, let's take in finance. No one was looking after themselves. They were just looking towards others, authority figures, for guidance, and there was no partnership. So I'm hearing a lot of like separation, a lot of, you mentioned politics. But my relationship with authority is very different, in that my parents are being immigrants. Like, my dad has a green card. He's 74. He's lived in the United States since 1970. And he still dresses up with a blazer and a collared shirt every time he enters U.S. Customs. Like, that's how much he fears authority, that like he doesn't belong. Like, he could get in trouble for having a green card, like legally, that he needs to project that his goodness. And so it's funny. It's like, for me, authority is like, yes, whatever you say, I don't fight it. I acquiesce to it, because I culturally from a place of like, don't rock the boats. And so that could be a whole separate other conversation. But it feels, so when I hear you say, is like, well, and I'm sure many of our listeners are like, well, I work in stock, in investment banking, and I'm not in alignment. My self-interest is to work on cooler projects, or to be kinder, or to be more honest, or to have more flexibility or more free time. But the system, and let's say in this case, financial services, that's just not in the contract, right? The contract is you subjugate your self-interest. We pay you a fuckload of money, and we have this highly transactional relationship. And when it doesn't work for either one of us, we have agency and we can walk away. I can fire you or you can quit. Is that a fair assessment of like how you would, I know we're talking very generically about something like financial services. Do you think that that's a fair assessment, or would you add to that? Or
so the way I saw it was based on my relationship with authority. The way you see it, I think, is based on your relationship with authority. So like, okay, I either acquiesce with you or I leave the country, right? Like, like this is the way you deal with an authority. And so I think that that's how you would naturally, that's how we would naturally view not only money, but like the way that we go and get money in the world. And so, so that, and it is, I think that's what makes it so emotional, frankly. What makes it emotional is the fact that we're not actually interacting with money. We're interacting with our projection of what money is. We're interacting really with probably one of the primary authority figures in our early life when we're reacting with money. We're having that same relationship with money. And now I remember that moment for me. I was sitting in Ecuador. I was in venture capital world, and the way it worked was I just read about the WhatsApp acquisition, and I was reading like where I think it was something like, less than like $5 million was put in. It sold for multi-billions.
Like 6 people, right? It was like the highest per employee exit ever.
Exactly. And one of them was this guy at Sequoia. If I recall the story correctly, it was like some guy at Sequoia who Sequoia was like, we're not putting money in here. And he put his own money in. And so he like became a billionaire off of like $500,000 or whatever it was. And I felt this kick in my stomach. I was sitting on a hammock in Ecuador. I felt this kick in my stomach, visceral, like poof. And I was like, I closed my eyes. I'm like, where did I feel that the first time? What's the first time I felt that? Just by grace, that question arose. And I just I asked my body, I didn't ask my mind, and my body just took me back to trying to earn my father's love. And money had just been the surrogate of that emotional thought pattern in my life. So there was I got trained into trying to earn my father's love. And when my dad wasn't around and that relationship wasn't like as strong, I just put money into the place of my father, and I was trying to earn that. And so to me, that's a lot of people project into money. They project that early authority issue. I've seen it with all the CEOs that I work with. I see it all the time.
Wow. Got it. So because I had in my notes something is like money is a surrogate for parents' love is what you had said. So I'd be curious here. So I guess one thing that I'm hearing is that if money is a projection of our needs or our unmet desires or wantings, then everyone has a different projection. So like you can like we were talking about financial services, and I see this like very submissive, like you're the boss, I listen, and like if we don't like the deal, like we just like part ways. And then you see this like very clashing, like you're the authority. Right. I disagree with your authority, and I'm going to fight you for it. And we're in the exact same system. We could have the same exact boss.
Yes,
and
that's
we're
right.
just living in I guess alternate, or I don't even know if it's alternate or similar realities. I guess they're both at the same time.
Right.
God,
let me geek out on that for just
please.
a second. This is just like a total tangent, but I think it's so useful. That's why, like, when I go into organizations now and I help them become more effective, one of the ways to make some organizations more effective is to have people report to a team instead of a person. Because like, I might project my authority onto the boss, you'd project your authority onto the boss. Like, the good student projects their authority onto the boss. But if everybody actually feels accountable to the team instead of a single individual, a lot of that projection stuff has to drop away. And so people show up a lot more cleanly when they feel accountable to a team rather than to a person.
Interesting.
Oh, I let a team down is something that feels a lot different than, oh, I let this authority figure down.
Yeah.
And so I just want to geek out that
Yeah.
that same phenomenon, the hack for one of the hacks for team dynamics based on that phenomenon is creating accountability to the team, not to a person.
Can you say more about this kind of, because I've never thought about it this way, that, I know that I project, and I know that henceforth my reality is a byproduct of my projections, right? If I, but to then kind of intertwine it with money and then intertwine it into, I've always seen it as like a one-to-one thing. It's like whatever, like my dream about you yesterday is some projection I have about our relationship. But to like put that into a more complex system where there's like thousands of employees or entire sector, right? I wonder, like, I mean, maybe one way we could kind of disentangle that is, maybe I can use a version. I could use an archetype from the listener community, and the listener community generally feels like this sense of unworthiness, right? They're like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not loved, or I'm unlovable. And I think it's often because, just if I sample many of our readers, they grew up with some financial insecurity, kids of immigrants, nerds, social outsiders. And so there's always been this like, I don't belong. And I feel this deeply. And so from this I don't belong comes this massive overcompensation, which is, well, if you're not, I'm not going to belong because I look this way, or because my parents have this little money, or I will belong through other ways. And the tool we know best is achievement. I'm going to be the best at this, the best pianist, the best valedictorian, best CEO.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd love to hear, like, how does that projection kind of multiply and expand? I'm not like totally clear on my question to you, but maybe if you take that as the starting kernel, I'm sure you've dealt with that type of person as well.
I'll put it into like the principled way that I would look at it, which is, if you got that imprint early on in life, that emotional imprint of like, oh, I don't belong, and I need to earn my belonging, which I think are two different imprints, right? Like,
one is
because some people, I don't belong and fuck them.
Oh,
and some people, I don't belong and I need to earn my belonging. So if you have those things, then what you're going to do is constantly create a system, or see that the system is one that perpetuates that. So one thing you'll do is you'll manipulate reality to make sure you're in that kind of a system. One, you're going to attract people that propel that system. And the other thing is you're going to see evidence that you're only going to see the evidence that supports that belief system. So I'll give you a different example as a way for us to, so let's say you were emotionally abandoned as a kid. And one thing you're going to do is you're going to attract other people who emotionally abandon you. You're going to be like, as my friend used to say in our 20s, I can close my eyes, take a dart, throw it behind my back in a bar full of women, and I will always hit the hurt one who feels like men have always hurt her, and that's the one I'm going to be attracted to, right? And we've all had that person who's like, I've dated 6 or 7 different people, but they're indistinguishable. They have different driver's license, but they like all kind of look like the same person. So that's the attraction part.
You'll attract people that share that similar pain and belief system.
Or the corresponding pain, probably more.
Okay.
The corresponding pain. So if you feel like you have to earn to be part of a place, you're very likely to attract bosses. You're more likely to attract bosses who feel like you have to earn your place in the team. That means they're going to be a little more critical. The bosses are going to be a little more critical. They're going to be a little bit less blaming of themselves, more blaming of you as far as results go. You know, they're going to be less coaching. They're going to be more authoritarian, less authoritative. So like, that's the attraction part of it.
Hey, is that attraction, would you say it's kind of energetic? Like the universe will just put those types of people together? Or is there like scientific or psychologist like explanation for why that happens?
Well, I mean, you have an interview process, and in that interview, like I've sat down with like people on their first dates or sat across from people on their first dates. I can tell you what their relationship's going to look like by what they say to each other on the first date. They kind of announce the whole thing. They're just not particularly aware that they're announcing the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so tell me about your childhood. Tell me, oh, my last girlfriend did X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. You know, like you just like hear all the stuff just laid out. Like, oh, I see what patterns are going to show up here. So there's an interview process where it's like, you know, the difference if you're being interviewed by somebody who's like caring or if somebody is like very critical or so, like they're different interview processes. And so, and I would say that they're looking for each other. Those corresponding things are actually looking for each other. There's a reason why. I mean, I remember when I did international stock lending, on the other side of the trade were 7 or 8 different companies. You know, Lehman back in the days a while ago, obviously Goldman and Morgan Stanley, et cetera. And there's like, oh, like there's an attitude of a Goldman person. You know, like if you're dealing like across the board, there's like that person fits into that Goldman category pretty good. That person fits into the Lehman category. That's not perfect, but there's like broad strokes of people in the company.
And so someone who believes that their acceptance is conditional or their love is conditional will attract people who give conditional love. Is that?
Yeah. And they'll be attracted to high performance, you know, things where everybody's really, really trying hard to perform.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's why they like work at Goldman. They don't like, go to nonprofits.
Right. Or I would say like, right, if somebody really wants to be successful, there's ways of being successful in this world that don't require 16-hour work days where you can make, you know, there's people who make a lot of money at Goldman. There's also the guy who owns the 5 tire shops down the street, makes about the same money as a managing director of Goldman. Maybe he doesn't work that hard. Maybe he doesn't have to prove himself to anybody. Lots of ways to make money, infinite ways to make money.
That's so fascinating. Right? Yeah. And I could see as
Please go ahead.
I could see as you're speaking that it's almost like I'm starting, it's like, the tire seller is just not in my reality. Like I know he exists, but when I'm forming my reality, my metaverse in my own head, he's just not a part of it. And so it's like he doesn't exist, even though.
Right.
So, okay.
Well, I think you live in Southern California, if that's right.
In LA, yeah.
Right. So I remember a realtor in Newport Beach, and at the time she only sold $20 million homes and higher, right? That was her specialty. And I asked, what's the thing? She said, oh yeah, these are all, you know, medium-sized small business owners.
Yeah. Wow.
Like that's where like, and I remember the Economist had a thing about where, you know, everybody in the world over $10 million, where does it come from? It's only like 10 or 15% are earners, like investment bankers, like, or lawyers. The rest of them are business owners or inheritors. And the vast majority of them are business owners.
Yeah.
And I know some business owners who work, you know, 100 hours a week. And I know some business owners that work 20.
Yeah.
Making that kind of money. So there's lots of ways to do it.
Okay. So I sidetracked you a bit. So we have this archetype that needs conditional acceptance, hardworking, and all that. And you talked about attraction, and there were 2 other things.
All right.
Seeing evidence.
And so the other one is the proving.
Correct. Okay.
So if I wanted to prove that I had to earn my acceptance, and I had to pick between all the places in the world that I could go that would prove that, I would probably pick an investment banking or McKinsey or, someplace that is,
Yeah.
highly accountable. You're going to eat what you kill. Like there's going to be a certain way in which I'm going to do that. So I'm constantly proving my reality by seeing things, either by being involved in environments where that's the case, but also so I'll give you, for instance, in the emotional abandonment thing. So my early love experiences were all about, me recreating the emotional abandonment thing. And so if I was with a woman in my early 20s and they were like, oh, I have to take care of myself, I would see that as abandonment. I wouldn't see that as self-care. You might have seen it as self-care and been like, oh, great, a woman who can take care of herself. That's wonderful. I was like, she's abandoned me, and I'd be all reactive to it. So that's where you're looking for your own proof. It's, like being on the internet and being supportive of one political party. You're going to find all sorts of evidence.
Yeah.
So that's that part of it. That's the proving part of it. And then there's the manipulation part of it, which is like in that emotional abandonment thing. If I felt that beginning of emotional abandonment, I get very defensive, I get very angry, which made people abandon me. Like, who the fuck wants to be with somebody who's defensive and angry? Not many people. And so there's a way in which you're so I have an episode of this on the podcast about golden algorithm, and it
We'll link to it,
basically what it says is that there's something that we don't want to feel because of our childhood. We don't want to feel something, and so we attract that feeling into our life in the exact way that we try to avoid it.
Whoa.
So if you don't want to feel like you don't belong, and the way you try to avoid not belonging is through earning, then the way that you earn is going to make you feel like you don't belong. So here's somebody who doesn't feel like they belong, a CEO. I don't know very many CEOs who are like, yeah, I feel like I really belong here in this group. They feel outside of the group. They feel like, oh, I have problems and I can't share them with everybody. Oh, it'd be so nice to have another group of CEOs that I could share this with. Like, there's this, like, that's an example of not belonging. Or you put yourself in, because I have to earn, I put myself in an environment of a whole bunch of other people who think they have to earn it. So it's so competitive that there's really no sense of belonging in the group. Like, I've only met 2 venture capital companies where there is a sense of teamwork.
Oh, because it all starts at that kind of root at the individual level.
And it's all been constructed that way, right? Like, in venture, you're kind of like, what's your portfolio? What did you invest in? What has happened there? Like, that is like, you're a business of one. Like, maybe you have the support of the platform, but you're a business of one. So it's like that sense of team, you never get it. So there's a lot of venture capitalists who feel like they don't belong. And maybe they feel that way because I don't belong because I'm smarter than everybody. Some people feel like I don't belong because, I'm not as risk adverse or whatever. But like, that is a very common I don't belong feeling. And it's why so many people in Silicon Valley have been bullied, don't feel they belong that way. So those are another examples of it.
Yeah. And is that like, I guess, we've been talking about venture capital and Wall Street. And so it is that it attracts, like you said, it attracts that kind of person. If you look at the kind of, I don't know, I use language like core wound, right? Or of like not belonging. Is there like, is there kind of a handful of needs that humans have that have not been addressed? And, for me, it might be like feeling like I don't belong. Is it super varied, or can it be distilled down to 3, 4, 5 kind of core human feelings, core human needs? Because I'm like a fish in the water as I'm hearing you talk. I'm like, I just know this one world of people, and it's my audience. It's my social group. They're my neighbors, And it's like, oh, wow, you really do attract that.
Right. on one level, you could probably do it to like 1, 2, or 3, like, right, which is like, I'm not safe, I'm not lovable. Like, you could potentially narrow it, or I'm not inherently good. That might be the third one.
Good and lovable might even be overlapping to some extent.
Maybe,
Yeah.
right. So you could do it that way, and then you can expand it out to, here, you said something earlier, you said something to the effect of, well, everybody has a different relationship to authority. And I'd say, nah, maybe there's like 8 general ones. You know what I mean? So it's just different. But I don't think that actually gets you to the place of clarity. What gets you to the place of clarity is, what's the thing I don't want to feel? How do I fall in love with feeling that? If I don't, like, the thing that gets you to clarity is, I don't want to feel like I don't belong. How do you fall in love with feeling that you don't belong? That's because everything's created by the avoidance of that emotional state.
Wow.
The entire scenario is created by that experience of emotional state.
And so money, relationship, doesn't matter, right? It all comes back to that question, right?
Yeah, that question. And there might be like 10 or 20 of those. So another example would be, probably, maybe not you, but generally a lot of immigrant families, there's a lot of fear, like, oh, we're not going to make it. And so there is a tremendous amount of pressure for the sons and daughters of an immigrant family to make money, to make safe bets, to like grow the, wow. Sorry about that. I had a spider just come down right in front of my face.
No worries. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So emotionally, right, there is like, I have to earn, I don't belong probably. And and I'm not valuable unless I earn. And so, or produce or get straight A's, but I have to achieve to be lovable. And so, how do you fall in love with the feeling of not being valuable? How do you fall in love with the feeling of not being lovable? How do you fall in love with the feeling of not belonging? And when you stop avoiding those emotional experiences and you start welcoming them, then the behavior changes. Then you can see outside the world that you've created for yourself.
So it's just so simple, but it's
Right.
it's
so
like it's also not, right? But how do you? So I mean, I might use myself as a trial guinea pig in this.
Yeah.
But not feeling valued, right? So how do you feel?
Yeah.
I fear not feeling valued. So everything I do is just keep reminding people that I'm valuable. I'm valuable. I'm valuable.
Yeah.
And so my fear is feeling unvaluable,
Right.
insignificant, irrelevant.
Right.
Irrelevance is often one I think about. It's like, so how do
Great.
you fall in love? So the question for me would be, how do you fall in love with being irrelevant or insignificant?
Yeah. There's a couple of steps in the process. The first is recognize when it's occurring.
Okay.
So oftentimes we do what we call speed bumping that emotional experience.
Okay.
Ba-ba-bum. It's not like ba-bum. It's ba-da-dum. And so we speed bump it. And so to actually be able to stop and say, oh, that's that moment. So that moment when you're proving yourself, right before that was the moment of the experiencing of irrelevance. So the first step is to just recognize when you're feeling that experience. The second step is to investigate the experience. What does it feel like? Where is it in my body? How long does it last? How does it move? What's the center feel like? What's the outside feel like? What do the edges feel like? Where does it start? Where do I begin? Like, there's a ton of inquiry. We have something on I'm sure we can put it in the show notes.
Okay.
There's a way for people to get a meditation where people can really do that. So the second step is to really like investigate it, really get to know it. Like, what is this thing? And in the experience of getting to know it, you find out that the avoidance of it and the resistance of it is far more painful than the thing itself. Oftentimes it's a really strong signal. It's really valuable information. It's really good data. Oh, when I feel this, it means X, Y, and Z. You know, when I feel angry, it means I probably have a boundary I need to make. Oh, when I feel scared, it means there's some way in which I'm not taking care of myself, or I'm pushing down my excitement. There's a signal that comes from it.
Yeah.
And so then you start getting excited because you're like, oh, this is really good data. This can help me live a better life. So why would I want to avoid it? And then finally, it's a little bit like the Luke Skywalker going into the cave piece. It's like you often find out that the thing you're avoiding is actually the thing you've always been looking for, which is really strange. But I was talking to somebody, coaching somebody the other day who was dealing with jealousy. And I was describing to them that the jealousy that they have, they are both pushing somebody away, because being really jealous and getting aggressive with somebody is not like inviting them towards you. It's like, ugh. But they're also like, I want you, but they're pushing away. And what they're avoiding is that deeper level of love and intimacy and jealousy, that they'd be avoiding that. And if they really feel into their jealousy, they'll find out it's because there's a part of them that's really scared to lose. And to be really scared to lose is the love itself. Like, you don't get jealous over something that you don't love. So you're just pushing the love away from yourself inside.
Yeah.
And so that's the way it is with all the emotions, is that the thing that you're running away from is usually the thing that you actually want.
Wow.
At the same time.
That's
right.
Yeah. Wow.
And so those are the steps. And then the only other step in there is often the expression of it. Our emotions are muscular in nature. You can't stop an emotional experience without constricting muscles. And so there is an expression part of it and a release of the musculature so that you're not in that pattern.
Wow.
So that's the other part of it. So that's another necessary step in the process of falling in love with an emotional experience. And as we fall in love with them, as we welcome them, they totally change the experience of them is completely different. It's just like, imagine the feeling of breathing, and now imagine the feeling of resisting breathing. One is comfortable, totally pleasurable, and one is gets more painful.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I'm following everything. And I've heard you and other students of yours kind of talk through some of these different steps. You have a huge diaspora of evangelists and people who keep highlighting and showcasing your work, which is really beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Many of which have been on this podcast. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I had no idea. That's cool.
Also, we had Anita. I think I mentioned Anita to you when we were at the retreat, and then Scott Haber. That episode is not out yet, but he was referencing some of these. Actually, make love to the fear. The interesting thing that I've realized as you're talking through this is none of it involves intellectualizing what's happening. And maybe I missed a step. Maybe I misheard you. But for example, if I fear insignificance, what. Before this conversation, my first impulse would be to list in my head all the ways in which I am significant, and how irrational it is to feel insignificant when I have a wife who loves me, the amazing kids, my parent, and am I hearing you correctly that you just were like, fuck that, or that's not. That's just scratching the surface, or like, because you went straight into like, and I know that this will feel strange to our listeners, because it felt strange to me the first time people have said like, feel the pain. Actually, I was with a mutual friend of ours who was at the retreat, and I said, yeah, remember when you were going through this decision, and then someone in the group would say, well, what is that? How does that feel in your body? And he's like, I don't know. I just like, my body's not thinking about whether I should launch this new business line. It's completely in my head. And I think a lot of the listeners here are going to be like, feeling like, what's the point of feeling irrelevance in my abdomen when I can use the thing I'm so used to, my brain, and rationalize it, or
Oh, that's great. I'll tell you exactly why. Is because neurologically speaking, you do not make intellectual decisions. You make emotional ones. If I go into your brain, pull out the emotional center of your brain, you would cease to make decisions. It would take you a half an hour to decide what color pen to use. It would take 4 hours to decide where to have lunch. There's a book called Descartes' Error, 2012, by a neuroscientist who talks about this phenomenon and how it's, I'm simplifying it a little bit, but basically we make emotional decisions. And what we're using the intellect for is trying to figure out how to how to make a decision that'll make us feel a certain way. So if you think about like, how many decisions have you made to feel relevant? How many decisions have you made to not feel irrelevant? How many decisions have we made to feel loved or not feel loved, or to feel happy or not feel happy? If you think about it that way, it's like, or if you got a SWOT analysis, oh, are you going to start this new business line? Okay, here's the SWOT analysis, and we know that it's complete. And you look at it, and then some perfectly brilliant authority figure that you had 100% trust in came down and said to you, yeah, but you'd be happiest if you did this. What's the purpose of the SWOT analysis anymore? Right? Like, or maybe it's not happiness for you, but maybe it's whatever you feel most relevant.
Yeah.
If you did this. So we make emotional decisions. And so to not, and a lot of our decision making is to avoid a feeling. It's to avoid feeling something. And so if you stop avoiding feelings, you have a lot more optionality at on the table. You have a lot more clarity because you're not. How many people don't start a business because they're scared that they might feel like a failure? If you're like, oh, I can't wait to feel like a failure. Like, how does that change you wanting to start your business?
Wow.
So that's how it's relevant. That's one. On the intellectual question, the question before that, I would say, in the personal transformation process, it's really important to do intellectual work, emotional work, and nervous system work.
You said, intellectual, nervous system, and what was the second one?
And
Emotional.
And emotional, right? So you're working with the 3 brains. You're working with the head, the human brain, the prefrontal cortex. You're working with the musculature, emotional, mammalian part of the brain, and you're working with the reptilian nervous system part of the brain. And if you don't, transformation is a lot slower if you're not working on all 3 of those levels. So the intellectual part is really, really, really important. When it comes to emotional work, however, the intellectual work to get to emotional work is just whatever deconstruction needs to happen so that the brain can get the hell out of the way and the emotional work can occur. So that's, and so for me, if I was working with you and your brain was in the way of feeling it, I would be like, yeah, of course you're irrelevant. Are you kidding me? You're like 1 in 7 billion people. Like, like when you're dead, maybe it's 1 generation, if anybody even remembers you, and the way they remember you isn't going to even be close to how you actually were. Like, and the people who are going to remember you are only remembering you because of some sort of genetic inclination to remember our parents. But it's like, of course you're irrelevant. I'm irrelevant. We're all fucking irrelevant. Like, I would disable your brain that way because it's a little more effective typically than trying to convince you. Right? Like, how many times have we felt sad and somebody tries to convince us not to? It's like, that shit never works.
Well, it's funny, as you were saying that, I could feel parts of my body like starting to react. Like it was like an attack, it's like a germ attacking a molecule or something. It's like pop, pop, pop,
Right.
pop.
Right.
And I mean, is it fair? I mean, sorry.
That's why, that's the reason I would do it, because it actually puts you more in contact with the feeling and the defense.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that, again, in these worlds of finance and entrepreneurship, and we are so hyper indexed on the intellectual and ignorant of the emotional and the nervous system side of it?
Most of America generally is over indexed on the intellect.
Yeah.
I have some clients who are CEOs who are incredibly successful, and their work far more on empathy and I would call body intelligence. So there's you can be successful with any over indexed in any of those areas. I think it's like if you're doing something like AI, your intellect better be intact. Or if you're doing something like a hedge fund, your intellect better be intact. You're not going to be successful without it. However, if you have like really good, if you're really in touch with the body intelligence or the emotional intelligence, it's going to be a lot easier, assuming that your intellect is at the level.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's about, the question is, how do you nurture the intellect that you don't have access to?
Yeah, got it.
Instead of being completely imbalanced on one. And so typically, I think the bigger problem is that a lot of the people that are heady, when they get defensive, I can't tell you how many, people like that are married. People who are heavy, very, very heavy head are married to some very emotional person. And then it's not always the case, but maybe 50% of the time they're very emotional. And then they're like, your emotions, my head, and there's all this fight. But really what's happening is they're trying to integrate the two things together.
That you just described my marriage.
Yeah.
I married an emotional artist, who's a feeler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
this like,
exactly.
can't get that. I'm like, don't feel that way. And she's like, what do you mean don't feel that way? So
exactly.
I wonder, just to circle this back on money, I think to me, the pathways are still very obvious, but they've become very obvious. But to our listeners, they still might be, who are kind of hearing this kind of conversation for the first time. I was, there was listening to a podcast with, you probably know Scott Galloway, the NYU professor, VC entrepreneur, and another.
I'm horrible with names,
okay.
so
anyway,
I'm like,
There's a guy, Scott Galloway, pretty pundit, serial entrepreneur, and a younger entrepreneur, Sam Parr, who sold his company, and they're both online personalities. And they're on this episode, and Scott Galloway has $100 million of net worth, and he's 58.
Yeah.
And Sam Parr is 32, and they all state this. They have like his $20 million of net worth.
Yeah.
And the whole 20 minutes of the episode is Scott basically saying how he must sleep with one eye open. He could, we're one Great Depression away from him losing it all. You have to watch your money like a hawk, or else, you could lose it all. Basically, he's just terrified of losing it all, like $100 million. And then Sam, kind of the younger, younger, but he just is like, he's like, hey man, when it comes to money, I'm broken. He's like, I will always be scared of not having enough money. And I ask you,
I hear always scared that my mom / dad / love will go away. That's what I hear.
Yeah.
I'm always scared that one day I won't be valuable. I'll be seen through. I mean, that's what I hear there.
And so I know that people will hear that episode and they've seen that, and someone might have 5 million or 2 million, but that fear is universal. Just change the number, and that, like, I'm going to lose it all. I'm going to be, Dan.
Almost, I wouldn't call it universal, but a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Really?
It's funny. Yeah. You're making me realize like how much of a bubble that I operate in. It's like it's in the people that I hang out with, it's universal, which probably says a lot about who I should be hanging out, who I need to hang out more with. But again, I think like you started to allude to kind of the fear that it's there. Again, I think many people in our group would take that and be like, well, if you just lived off the dividends, you could, like Scott Galloway, 3%, that's $3 million a year. Like, can you really spend $3 million a year at 58 for, 25 years? But I'm also seeing it's like,
especially with treasuries where they are today.
Exactly. Yeah, 5%, lock that in. Yeah. But again, I think it's a perfect example that you can't intellectualize away that fear, because if you could, it would be gone. I think intellectually, if you have $100 million and you have half a brain, you're probably going to be financially fine. But that's not what he feels.
I would So that's an interesting one. I know lots of incredibly smart people who had over $50 million who don't have it now.
Okay.
I can name 10 of them. And what made them lose it wasn't the brain, it was the fear of losing it or the emotional incapacity.
Say more.
Like, how to maintain $100 million, you don't even need to be that smart, right? Like, but if you have an emotional penchant for some sort of emotional experience, I think that's going to get you a lot quicker than, like you said, you could either do treasuries right now or you could do farmland. I mean, I think on average over the last 60 years, it's 11% return on farmland. Like, maybe you have, some diversified risk over climate, but there's ways to handle that. But what actually seems to occur when people lose it, it's not because they didn't make a smart financial choice. It's because they have an emotional pattern that's running.
So it's like they made a bad emotional. I mean, we probably don't want to put. It's like we're making up a scenario, but is it like their emotions got the best of them, or their emotion?
People, things I've seen, people, they can't find the drive without the need, so that they create the need so that they can get back to the drive. That would be one thing that I saw. I've seen, I'm not worth it. I got it. I've also identified with like people who are like upcomers who were like, yeah, I'm going to make it. They were always seeing themselves as like the underdog. And so when they're all of a sudden the authority and not the underdog anymore, they lose it because they need to identify themselves as the underdog, not as the authority. There's the, I don't want to feel this privilege. I don't want to feel the hate and pain of other people who don't have the money. And so they lose the money for that purpose. They're hearing their dad's voice or mom's voice of like, you're not good enough, criticism. And so they're proving their dad or mom's criticism correctly. Those would be things that I would see that would lose people their money far quicker than
stock market sell-offs.
Like, it's not hard to get a money manager there's not very many money managers who are going to lose $100 million. And it's really easy to put a system in place where, they can't steal from you. So like, this isn't a challenge.
And
it's an emotional need.
And then if that, I know we're, now we're just talking about internet personalities that you and I probably never met. In that case, if they're like, because even Sam, the younger of the two, he said like I've done countless hours of therapy, and I believe him. And he's like, I still feel this way. And is that, what do you read? Because I think that would be the next thing. People be like, well, go see a therapist. A therapist can help you fix that, right? You're
right.
What is the I would say that to myself, right? I have seen a therapist to try to ease my relationship.
I think
with money.
there's a couple of things there. First one is like, what percentage of any population is really great at what they do? So a therapist to me is like a CPA, like if I remember a study that it was like 50 CPAs were given the exact same numbers and they came up with 50 different numbers. So like, there's a lot of mechanisms that can help you grow that may or may not be the therapist you're seeing or therapy in general. So the question is, how have you put the effort into if he's a startup CEO, that means he's probably very familiar with the iterative practices of, marketing, or the iterative practices of sales, where you have to iterate to find the solution. Like, my question to him, assuming I don't know him, so I could be dead wrong here, but is like, what are the iterations there besides therapy or besides a therapist? So that's one thing that comes to mind. The second thing that comes to mind,
all in the intellectual realm still? Like, it was therapy in the kind of intellectual realm?
That's a great example. Would be like, did you only approach this in the head?
Yeah.
Did you approach this in the heart? Did you approach this in the gut? So, right. And so that's a great question too. Like, you might understand it. So the way that I think about it is, if I'm like, I know I shouldn't be scared, but I am, then the head is clear. You got to go to the heart and the gut. And have you done that work? Have you done the somatic work for it? So that's one thing, is like, are you getting the right tools for that? That's the first question. The other thing that I notice is that oftentimes money is something that lets go later.
Mhm.
It's more in the core, right? So relationship with God, relationship with money, and love, life, and kids are kind of more in the core stuff. And so sometimes you have to work the lattice work, what I would call the lattice work of stuff that structures it to get to the money. Not always, but sometimes. And so it's like, if somebody came to me and they said, "Oh, I really want to work on this money issue. I'm scared of money," and I would think to myself, they might get to that a lot slower than somebody who came to me and said, so like, I'm scared that I'm not lovable, or I'm scared that, I feel like the other foot is always going to fall, or that the rug is always going to
Yeah.
get pulled. And then the money thing might resolve actually quicker because they're dealing with.
That
So
happened to me. That helped with me, where it's like, I have a money thing, and it's like, no, you have a worthiness thing. And then I was like, oh, okay, let me go look at the worthiness thing.
right,
And then the money thing just became less of a thing.
right, yeah, that's right, yeah. So that would be another one. And then the other one is that there's like practices that can be done that would be potentially, like the work that we do is very experimental. It's like, hey, try this thing out, see what happens. What do you learn? Okay, now let's try this thing out, see what happens. Here's a relational practice 2 people can do together, see what you learn. And so there's an experimental piece that where you're actually treating your life differently instead of sitting in a room and talking about treating your life differently. And so those practices can be incredibly helpful. And so my question would also be something to the effect of, what are the changes in your behavior that you've experimented with besides sitting and talking to a therapist?
And
And that would be another way that I would think about it. So
it could, and like,
So all of the-
hypothetically, it could be like, every time I'm scared to buy something nice for myself, buy it and see what happens. Is like that level of experiment, or more intellect, more of like a talk?
it could be as every time I'm scared of buying something, let's say it's an online purchase, I'm going to sit there and feel that feeling for 5 minutes before I press enter
Yeah.
or walk away. Or it could be, I'm going to visualize going broke very slowly. And I'm going to feel every emotion on the way.
I've tried
I'm
that
going to
one. Yeah.
And then I'm going to visualize becoming 10 times as wealthy,
Oh, I haven't done that one.
and every emotion along the way.
That's so, wow.
Right. So, because I'm just looking for, where's the emotional
Yeah.
hiccup.
Wow.
For those, I could give you another 30 or 40,
Yeah.
but where are the practices that you're doing and how long have you done them? And so there's lots of other approaches besides therapy.
Wow.
And if I went to a therapist or a coach for seeing some sort of thing, and like 6 months had gone by and I didn't feel significant movement, go find another therapist or coach. Not that they're bad,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, but
Might
like,
not be.
it's not a match.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful to sit with, because I have tried some of these kind of negative visualizations, like I'm losing
Yeah.
my hair, and it's a deep insecurity, and so like I visualize like getting made fun of, and like how I look in certain ways, and the embarrassment, and the and all that, but I never do it on the like positive side of the ledger. I'm always like stuck on or not stuck, but I'm always focused on the fear, which it's all self-improvised, kind of like observing bits and pieces from, people like you and others.
I would say the other thing is that what I notice is usually, depending on the society, but anger or sadness are the first things that in general kind of areas that we don't want to feel. Then fear is something that we don't want to feel, but then it's joy, peace, bliss, excitement. Like the positive emotions are very scary for people to feel. Yeah. So that's another one, is like, because sometimes the thing getting in the way is a negative emotion. Sometimes the thing getting in the way is not wanting to feel a positive emotion. I don't want to feel happy because then the other foot's going to fall. I don't want to feel exuberant or enthusiastic because then I'll be criticized or whatever that is.
Yeah, I don't want to feel love because then I could have my heart broken, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's all
Or I don't want to feel love because when I was a kid, all of my love came with criticism.
Yeah.
So love still feels like criticism to me because I can't feel pure love. I can only feel like this, as an example.
Yeah.
So that's,
Wow.
And then there might just be a nervous system thing too. So I could go into it, and I just realized I don't know these two people. And so now there's this, I noticed that I don't want to say with any certainty that they have parents that don't love them or,
No.
that they needed her, that was going to scare away. I don't, but that's what I hear is the most likely thing.
And
is that
you could swap them out for me. So it would be, it would be very similar, like patterning. So, Joe, we're going to do this again in many different formats. Like we've already been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, which is amazing.
Oh, wow.
I experienced this when we spent time together in person, which is probably why I had this kind of strange dream last night where I was just like, no, this is really happening. And this is someone who I really, really, really respect. And I've spent a lot of time in the world of self-improvement, but when you talk, it's like you like touch all the lily pads of self-improvement, but you just like you just talk about things on a different plane, much elevated, more plane, a more elevated plane, a much more poignant and salient plane, and it's just really. And again, I've spoken to many of your students, and they all share similar descriptions of you and your methods, and just your spirit, and so I'm very amazed and honored, and I'm very grateful.
Thank you. I'm really grateful too. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and the curiosity and vulnerability you bring is really fucking cool. Like I really dig it. I will say for this particular audience, the reason I believe that I have some of the abilities that you said, or that like this is the outcome of the work, is because I did marry it with business. Because it was like, because the rubber has to hit the road, because it's like, if it's not practical, if it's not applied, if it's like just sitting on a cushion and you're not like using it in the real world, there's something lost in it. And so I just say that as like to everybody who's listening to this, who's in business, like that's the opportunity. Is like, it's like business is a form of self-discovery is hot, man. It's great. And you get to learn things in a really practical way.
That's amazing. That could be its own podcast episode. Business is a form of self-discovery, which resonated with me a lot when we met in person. So Joe, thank you.
Cool.
We'll put all these links in. Any specific places you want to call out, we'll put everything in the show notes as well, where people can find you.
Yeah, the best place to start with us is either one of our free 90-minute, like, get to know what the work is. We do really unique explorations. It's I don't know any place else that does the kind of work that we do. So you can get an experiment of that, really gentle experiment. We have courses in decision making. A great way to start the first course, a great one, is connection course, and then we have one in what we call the master class, which is like the 7 ways that I see people hold themselves back in coaching, and experiments to run around those.
Amazing.
So those are, and the podcast, obviously, that's, if you don't have money, that's a free way to, I'm glad you like
the podcast is so good. So awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, pleasure. Great to be with you.